The radio had been dead for 11 years, but at 12:03 in the morning, it whispered the dog's name. Atlas stood alone beneath the abandoned watchtower, his white coat glowing beneath a thin wash of moonlight, ears raised toward the rusted speaker bolted high above the platform. The tower had not carried a signal since before half the Marines at Camp Ashford had finished high school. Its power lines had been cut. Its windows were clouded with salt. Even the red warning light at the top had gone dark years ago. Yet the voice came again, faint beneath the wind rolling in from the Carolina coast. Atlas, down. The German shepherd stopped barking. He lowered himself slowly onto the cold concrete, exactly as he had been trained to do, amber eyes fixed on the empty tower. 50 yards away, Corporal Ethan Cole froze beside the maintenance shed. He had followed Atlas through the fog after hearing the kennel gate rattle open, expecting to find the dog chasing raccoons or searching for scraps. Instead, he found him keeping watch over a place no one used anymore. Ethan held his breath. The air smelled of wet pine, seawater, and old iron. Somewhere beyond the dunes, waves folded against the shore with a low, patient rhythm. Atlas remained still, not frightened, not confused. Waiting. Atlas, Ethan called softly. The dog did not look back. His white fur stirred along his shoulders as another gust moved through the base. Then the speaker above them crackled. Just once. A dry little sound, like someone clearing dust from a forgotten throat. Ethan stepped closer, boots quiet against the damp pavement. Who's there? No answer came. Only the faint tapping of a loose cable against the tower frame. Ethan told himself that was all he had heard. Wind through metal. A damaged speaker catching some distant frequency. Grief turning noise into words. 9 days had passed since Gunnery Sergeant Isaiah Brooks disappeared during the storm. 9 days since his government truck had been found near the southern seawall with the driver's door open and rain pooled across the seat. Search crews had covered nearly 30 miles of coastline. Helicopters had circled until fuel ran low. Divers had checked the flooded channels beyond the old training grounds. They found Isaiah's flashlight. They found one glove caught in a fence. They did not find Isaiah. By sunset that afternoon, the official search had been suspended. The base called it a recovery now. Atlas refused to understand the difference. Every night since Isaiah vanished, the dog had left his food untouched. He slept facing the kennel door. At 11:57, he would rise, press his nose against the latch, and wait for the guard's footsteps to fade. Then he came here. Always here. Ethan had heard about it from the night crew, but no one took the story seriously. Marines were trained to trust evidence, not rumors passed over burnt coffee at 2 in the morning. They said Atlas was mourning. They said dogs returned to places connected with memory. They said Isaiah had probably brought him past the tower during patrols. But Ethan had served under Isaiah for 3 years. He knew the man's routines. Isaiah avoided this section of the base. He once called the tower a dead ear listening to an empty ocean. Atlas suddenly rose. His nails clicked once against the concrete. He lifted his head and barked 3 times. Sharp, evenly spaced. Then he waited. The fog moved between the tower legs like pale smoke. 5 seconds passed. 10. From somewhere below the platform came 2 soft knocks. Ethan's skin tightened along his arms. Atlas barked twice. The sound traveled upward through the steel beams and vanished into the dark. Again, silence. Then the old speaker breathed. Static gathered, thin and broken, followed by a voice too weak to belong to the wind. Good boy. Ethan reached for his radio, but his hand stopped halfway. Atlas turned at last and looked at him. There was no panic in the dog's eyes. No plea. Only the steady expression of a soldier who had reported the same truth night after night and had finally found someone willing to listen. Beneath them, deep under the abandoned watchtower, something knocked once more. 9 days earlier, Gunnery Sergeant Isaiah Brooks had stepped into the storm because someone else might still be out there. The weather warning had reached camp Ashford shortly after sunset, carrying news of a fast-moving coastal system expected to bring heavy rain, 40-mile-per-hour winds, and dangerous flooding across the southern training grounds. By 8 o'clock, most outdoor exercises had been canceled. Vehicles were being secured. Windows rattled in their frames. The Atlantic had disappeared behind a wall of rain. Isaiah stood beneath the covered motor pool with water shining across the shoulders of his field jacket, reading a maintenance report under the yellow light. At 38, He carried authority without needing to display it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and steady, with close-cropped black hair and a face that rarely revealed how tired he was. A pale scar crossed the back of his right hand, but the detail most Marines remembered was his voice. Calm, low, never wasted. Beside him, Atlas watched the rain with his ears forward. The white German shepherd looked almost silver beneath the overhead lamps, his coat clean except for a faint streak of mud near one paw. Atlas had worked with Isaiah for nearly 4 years. He knew the difference between thunder and danger, between a casual walk and a mission. That evening, he did not leave Isaiah's side. Southern sensors are still showing clear, Ethan Cole said, holding a tablet beneath his jacket. But the access road is already taking water. Isaiah studied the screen. The weather station reported rising wind and falling pressure. Yet 3 flood alarms near the old watchtower showed nothing. All green. Too green. Those sensors were inspected last month, Ethan added. Isaiah tapped 2 fingers against the dog tags beneath his shirt, a habit he had whenever something did not fit. Who signed the inspection? Civilian maintenance crew. For names. Did they check out? Ethan looked toward the administrative building. Not yet. Isaiah folded the report and placed it in his pocket. Call their supervisor. You think they are still down there? I think 4 people signed into a flood zone, and nobody has confirmed they came back. The wind drove rain sideways across the pavement. Atlas glanced up at Isaiah, waiting. Captain Rebecca Hale approached from the operations center, one hand holding her cap against the gusts. Brooks, the southern road is closing. I need 20 minutes. You have 10. Her eyes moved toward the dark line of pines beyond the base. After that, nobody goes past the gate. Isaiah nodded once. He did not argue. He never confused bravery with carelessness. He loaded emergency blankets, a first aid kit, 2 flashlights, bottled water, and a handheld radio into a government truck. Atlas jumped into the passenger side without being told. Ethan stood near the open driver's door, rain running from his hair. I can go with you. You can stay here and keep the channel open. Gunnery Sergeant, Isaiah looked at him. Not harshly, just long enough. If I lose contact, you tell Captain Hale exactly where I went. Ethan stepped back. Isaiah started the engine. Before closing the door, he said, 10 minutes. Then you make the call. The truck rolled south through the gate, headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the rain. Water streamed across the road in silver ribbons. Pine branches bent low beneath the wind, their needles scraping the roof as Isaiah drove past the abandoned barracks and toward the old coastal sector. Atlas sat upright, nose lifted toward the vents. 3 miles from the watchtower, he began to whine. It was quiet at first, then sharper. Isaiah slowed. What is it? Atlas pressed his nose toward the cracked window. Isaiah lowered the glass 1 inch. Cold rain sprayed inside, carrying the smell of salt, wet soil, and something faint beneath it. Diesel. Human scent. Fear. Atlas gave 1 short bark. Isaiah turned onto a narrow maintenance road barely visible through the storm. Half a mile later, the headlights found an empty utility cart angled beside a drainage ditch. Its warning lights were still flashing. A yellow raincoat lay across the seat. Isaiah stopped the truck and radioed the base. Static answered. He tried again. Nothing. Atlas was already staring toward the trees, body tense but controlled. Somewhere beyond them stood the old watchtower, black against a sky split by distant lightning. Isaiah clipped a lead to Atlas's harness, said. Atlas lowered his nose and moved forward. They passed the utility cart, crossed a strip of flooded gravel, and entered the pines. The dog pulled toward higher ground, following a scent the storm had not yet erased. After 200 yards, Isaiah heard voices. For maintenance workers were gathered beneath a concrete overhang near an old service entrance, cold and frightened but unharmed. One had twisted an ankle. Another held a dead radio. Relief moved across their faces when they saw the white dog emerge from the rain. Isaiah counted them twice. All 4, he asked. The crew supervisor nodded. Yes, sir. Then a younger worker looked toward the dark opening behind them. Not all, he said. Isaiah went still. Who else? The young man swallowed. A technician from the weather service. She went inside to check the relay before the lights failed. Atlas turned toward the opening. From deep beneath the hill, almost hidden by the storm, came the faint sound of metal striking metal. Isaiah handed the lead to the supervisor, but Atlas refused to move. The dog planted his paws and looked into Isaiah's eyes. Isaiah rested one hand against the white fur at his neck. "You stay with them." Atlas gave a low, uncertain sound. Isaiah tapped twice against his dog tags, their private signal for trust. Then he took a flashlight, stepped into the old passage, and disappeared beneath the watchtower. Corporal Ethan Cole did not sleep after Isaiah disappeared into the passage. He stayed on the radio through the storm, calling every 3 minutes until the channel became nothing but static and rain. By dawn, search teams had reached the maintenance workers and guided them back to the base, but the old service entrance had partially flooded. The passage beyond it was blocked by fallen debris and black water moving fast beneath the concrete steps. Captain Rebecca Hale ordered teams to circle the southern grounds, check every drainage outlet, and scan the shoreline. Atlas watched each vehicle leave. He watched each one return without Isaiah. For the first day, the white German Shepherd remained beside the operations building, sitting beneath the overhang with rain dripping from the edge of the roof. He refused food. He accepted water only when Ethan placed the bowl near his paws. On the second day, Atlas began pacing between the kennel and the southern gate. On the third, he stopped pacing. He waited. That change unsettled Ethan more than the restless movement had. Atlas was not surrendering. He was listening. At 11:57 that night, the dog rose from his blanket and pressed his nose against the kennel latch. The guard on duty, Private Nolan Pierce, assumed Atlas needed air. He opened the gate and clipped on a lead. Atlas walked calmly for 20 yards. Then he twisted free with one smooth movement and ran into the fog. Nolan shouted after him, but Atlas did not slow. His white body passed between the barracks like a pale flame, crossed the empty vehicle yard, and disappeared along the closed southern road. They found him beneath the watchtower at 12:16, sitting in the mud and staring upward. He had barked until his voice turned rough. The next night, he did it again. This time, the kennel latch was secured with a second clasp. Atlas waited until a supply truck entered the yard, slipped through the open service gate, and followed the road south. At midnight, Marines near the fuel station heard him barking in the distance. 3 barks. Silence. 2 barks. Captain Hale brought him back herself. She knelt beside him in the kennel and removed the mud from his paws with an old towel. "He is looking for Brooks," Nolan said. Captain Hale did not answer. She had signed too many forms that day, each one reducing a living man to coordinates, equipment records, and probability estimates. Atlas watched her with quiet amber eyes. At 11:57 the following night, he stood again. By the 5th night, everyone on duty knew the pattern. Some called it grief. Others said Atlas had learned the sound of the tower cables moving in the wind. Dr. Hannah Mercer disagreed. She had worked with military dogs for 14 years and knew the difference between panic, habit, and trained response. She stood outside the kennel as Atlas rose at the same minute for the 3rd night in a row. "He is keeping an appointment," she said. Ethan looked at his watch. With whom? That is the question. They followed him without a flashlight, staying far enough behind that Atlas would not feel guided. The dog moved with purpose. He did not search the roadside. He did not stop at Isaiah's abandoned truck or the entrance where the workers had been found. He went directly to the tower and stood on the same square of concrete beneath the rusted speaker. Then he barked 3 times. He waited. He barked twice. Ethan heard nothing in return, but Hannah crouched beside the tower support and placed her palm against the metal. Again, she whispered, as though Atlas could understand. The dog repeated the pattern. A faint vibration moved through the steel, too soft to be called a knock, too deliberate to be blamed on wind. Ethan pressed his ear to the support beam. Somewhere below, far beneath the concrete, came 5 weak taps. 3. A pause. 2. Atlas lowered himself to the ground. His breathing slowed. Hannah looked at Ethan, and he saw the certainty in her face before she spoke. "That is not morning." The next morning, engineers examined the tower. They found no active power, no working radio, and no accessible chamber below the foundation. The base maps showed only an old drainage line sealed decades earlier. By afternoon, the official explanation was thermal contraction in the metal. Cooling steel could knock. Underground water could echo. Dogs could connect random sounds with memory. Ethan tried to accept it. He truly did. But on the 6th night, he carried a recorder beneath his jacket and followed Atlas alone. The fog was thicker, softening the fences and floodlights until the base seemed suspended between land and sea. Atlas reached the tower at midnight. 3 barks. Silence. 2 barks. Ethan held the recorder close to the support beam. At first, there was only static from the wind. Then came the tapping. 5 measured knocks. After them, something else moved through the metal. A breath. A strained syllable. Ethan replayed the recording twice, then a third time with the speaker against his ear. The sound was weak, distorted, almost swallowed by the hiss of the ocean. But it was there. Not a complete word. Only the beginning of a name. Atlas looked up before the recording ended. His ears lifted. His tail moved once against the concrete. Ethan felt the cold settle deeper around him. The dog was not returning to remember Isaiah. Atlas believed Isaiah was answering. Ethan carried the recording to Captain Hale before sunrise. She listened in her office with the blinds closed and the volume turned high enough to reveal every scrape of wind against the microphone. The first 3 barks came through clearly. Then the pause. Then 2 more. Beneath them, almost hidden by static, was the beginning of a voice. Captain Hale replayed it. Her expression did not change, but her hand remained on the speaker after the sound ended. It could be interference, she said. From what? A handheld radio. A fishing vessel. Another frequency crossing the recorder. Ethan shook his head. It came through the tower support. You heard it through steel during coastal wind. Atlas heard it first. Captain Hale looked toward the window. Morning fog pressed against the glass, turning the base outside into pale shapes and dim lights. Bring Mercer, she said. Dr. Hannah Mercer arrived 20 minutes later with Atlas at her side. The dog entered the office quietly, stopped beneath Isaiah's photograph on the wall, and sat. Hannah listened to the recording twice. On the third playback, she closed her eyes. The dog responds before the voice becomes audible, she said. Ethan leaned closer. She pointed to the waveform on the computer screen. Here. His breathing changes. His collar shifts. He hears something before the recorder catches it. Captain Hale folded her arms. What does that prove? Only that Atlas is not reacting to his own bark. It does not prove Brooks is beneath a watchtower. No, Hannah said. But it proves something is answering. By 7 o'clock, a maintenance team had surrounded the old tower with equipment. They inspected the speaker, opened the rusted control cabinet, and removed panels that had not been touched in years. The electrical lines were severed. The radio unit had no battery. Moisture had corroded the internal contacts until several crumbled beneath a technician's glove. Nothing inside could receive a transmission, much less speak a name. Chief Warrant Officer Daniel Price climbed down from the platform carrying a coil of dead wire. He was 61, narrow-faced, and deliberate, with silver hair beneath his cap and the patient manner of a man who trusted old documents more than new assumptions. This tower has been silent since the relay station closed, he said. How long? Ethan asked. 11 years. Atlas stood beneath the platform, staring at the speaker. Price followed his gaze. The odd thing is that the speaker may not be where the sound started. He tapped one of the hollow steel supports. A low note traveled through the frame. Atlas turned immediately. The whole structure carries vibration, Price continued. Something enters the foundation, the steel brings it upward, and that speaker cone acts like a sounding board. Captain Hale looked down at the concrete. What enters the foundation? Price did not answer. He crouched near the place where Atlas returned each night and brushed dirt from a faded patch of paint. Beneath years of salt and grime, a dark blue symbol appeared. A circle crossed by 3 short lines. Ethan recognized it from old emergency maps. Communications conduit, he said. Price nodded. Or it used to be. The engineers brought out a ground scanner. They passed it slowly over the concrete, expecting solid earth beneath the tower. The first sweep showed nothing unusual. The second produced a narrow shadow 6 feet below. On the third, the screen revealed a straight hollow line extending inland beneath the old coastal sector. It was too smooth to be a natural cavity. Captain Hale ordered a search of the digital archives, but the modern base plans showed no tunnel, chamber, or utility route in that location. Price requested access to storage records kept in a basement beneath the administration building. There, among rolled maps and boxes marked for disposal, he found a weather-stained blueprint dated more than 40 years earlier. The tower was only the visible part of a larger system. Beneath it lay an emergency communications passage connected to several sealed service corridors. Why is none of this on the active map? Hale asked. Price studied a red stamp across the corner. Because it was decommissioned after a partial collapse. The entrances were supposed to be filled. Ethan traced the line with one finger. It ran from the tower toward the same concrete overhang where Isaiah had found the maintenance workers. He knew, Ethan said. Price unfolded a second page. A recent inspection form had been clipped to the blueprint. The date was 3 weeks earlier. At the bottom, beside a note about unstable flood sensors, was a familiar signature. Gunnery Sergeant Isaiah Brooks. Atlas moved closer to the map and placed his nose against the paper. Captain Hale stared at the signature for a long moment. He did not wander into that passage, she said. He went there because he knew what was underneath. Outside, the wind shifted across the tower, carrying a faint metallic tremor through the building. Atlas rose before anyone else heard it. He faced south and gave 3 measured barks. From somewhere below the floor, 2 quiet knocks answered. Daniel Price spent the next hour spreading old blueprints across the operations table while Captain Hale called every engineer still on base. The pages smelled of dust, mildew, and machine oil. Thin blue lines crossed beneath Camp Ashford like veins under skin, connecting the abandoned watchtower to relay rooms, drainage corridors, and emergency shelters built long before most of the current buildings existed. Across the top of one faded sheet, a name had been typed in block letters, Sentinel 9. Price traced the route with the blunt end of a pencil. This system was designed to keep working after power failure, he said. No radios. No lights. Just steel pipes carrying sound from one chamber to another. Ethan looked toward Atlas. The dog stood beside the table, alert but still, watching every hand that moved over the map. So Isaiah could have used the tower to send the signal. If he reached the primary conduit, Price said, and if the line is not completely blocked. Captain Hale studied the red markings along the southern section. What caused the collapse? Price turned. Another page. Groundwater. The ocean pushes beneath this side of the base during high tide. The old reports mentioned sinkholes, shifting walls, and chambers that flood without warning. A silence settled over the room. Outside, generators hummed beneath a sky the color of dull steel. The first storm had moved north, but another system was forming offshore. Weather reports predicted heavy rain by the following night. Captain Hale looked at the clock. We have 1 day. The crew began with the entrance beneath the concrete overhang, but 6 feet of mud and broken masonry sealed the lower passage. Pumps pulled out dark water for nearly 2 hours and gained less than a yard. Price studied the blueprint again and pointed to a narrow line farther inland. There may be another access point beneath the old supply chapel. The building had been closed for years, its windows boarded, and its small wooden cross bleached pale by salt air. Marines removed warped floorboards near the back wall and found a steel hatch beneath them. The wheel on the hatch would not turn. Atlas circled it once, pressed his nose to the seam, then stepped away. No reaction. No scent. No sound. Not here, Hannah Mercer said. Ethan frowned. The map says this is connected. Connected does not mean open. Atlas left the chapel and pulled toward the southern road. They followed him past the vehicle yard, beyond the flood barrier, and into a stretch of scrub pine where the ground rose above the drainage basin. Half a mile from the tower, the dog stopped beside a low mound hidden beneath vines and sand. A rusted metal cap protruded from the soil. Price knelt and cleared the dirt with both hands. Ventilation shaft. Atlas pushed his nose toward a narrow gap where the cap had shifted. His body became rigid. He inhaled once, twice. Then he gave a soft sound deep in his throat. Ethan crouched beside him. Isaiah. Atlas scratched at the sand. Engineers brought shovels and cleared the opening, exposing a pipe nearly 2 feet wide descending into darkness. A breath of cold air rose from it, carrying the smell of wet concrete, rust, and something human beneath the dampness. Hannah held one of Isaiah's gloves. Near the opening, Atlas smelled it, then lowered his head toward the shaft. His tail moved once. He is there, she said. Captain Hale called for a camera line. The small lens descended 20 feet before reaching a horizontal duct. The image shook across a narrow passage filled with shallow water. No person appeared, but the microphone caught a distant tapping. 3 knocks. A pause. 2 knocks. Ethan leaned over the monitor. Answer him. Price picked up a wrench and struck the metal cap 3 times, waited, then struck twice. For several seconds, nothing returned. Atlas stared into the shaft without blinking. Then, faint and far below, came 1 knock. Another. A third. The dog barked once, sharp with recognition. The sound traveled down the pipe. Static crackled through the camera microphone. A voice followed, broken by distance and water. 2 alive. Everyone froze. Captain Hale bent toward the speaker. Gunnery Sergeant Brooks, this is Captain Hale. Confirm your location. Only a wash of air answered. Then the voice returned, weaker. Lower relay. Price turned to the map. The lower relay chamber lay almost 1,000 feet beneath the ridge, separated from the shaft by 2 collapsed junctions. He is not alone, Ethan said. Captain Hale's eyes moved to the maintenance roster. One name had never been cleared after the storm. Lena Ortiz, a weather technician, 26 years old. Price stared at the blueprint. There is a service route from the north outlet, but it ends near the tidal gate. Can we reach them? Hale asked. At low tide, perhaps. Ethan checked the coastal chart. Low tide is just after midnight. Atlas lifted his head at the word. The pattern suddenly made sense. Isaiah had not chosen midnight because it was quiet. He had chosen it because the ocean released the tunnel for only a few minutes each night. Price folded the map carefully. Then that is when we go in. Beyond the windows, the first drops of new rain began tapping against the glass. Atlas turned toward the south. Beneath the abandoned ground, 2 people were waiting for the sea to loosen its grip. Captain Hale made the decision before anyone could argue. We do not leave. Him unheard, she said. The rescue team divided at once. Price and 2 engineers returned toward the north outlet for cutting equipment, while Ethan, Hannah, and Atlas remained near the collapse to hold the location. Water began sliding across the floor in thin, cold ribbons. It touched Ethan's boots, then climbed over the soles. The sound of the ocean grew louder inside the walls, not like waves, but like a deep breath filling a sealed room. Atlas stayed flat beside the narrow opening. His ears shifted at every faint vibration. Hannah rested one hand against his harness. He knows time is changing, she said. Ethan checked his watch. 12 minutes until the tide turned fully. Beyond the debris, something scraped against concrete. Then came 3 slow taps. Atlas answered with 2 barks. Ethan leaned close to the gap. Gunnery Sergeant Brooks, the team is bringing equipment. Stay with us. A pause followed. When Isaiah spoke, his voice was weaker than before. Ortiz, cold. Hannah opened the medical pack and pulled out a thermal blanket, water pouch, and chemical warming packs. Can we pass anything through? She asked. Ethan measured the opening. Barely 8 inches at the widest point. Too small for a person, but perhaps enough for Atlas. Hannah understood before he spoke. No, Atlas rose. The space may narrow farther in, she continued. We do not know what is on the other side. The dog stepped toward the opening anyway. Ethan held the harness. Atlas, wait. Atlas looked at him, then turned his head toward Isaiah's voice. There was no fear in his expression, only purpose. Ethan remembered Isaiah on the first night, placing his hand against the white fur and giving the private signal for trust. 2 taps against the dog tags. Ethan reached beneath his rain jacket and touched the spare tag Isaiah had once given him after a training exercise, a simple marker stamped with the unit number. He tapped it twice against the metal buckle of Atlas's harness. The dog became still. Hannah looked at Ethan. Are you sure that is what it means? It means he will not be abandoned. She closed her eyes for a moment, then secured the thermal blanket and warming packs. Inside, a small waterproof pouch attached to Atlas's harness. A slim communication light went beside them. Ethan shortened the lead and guided Atlas toward the opening. The dog lowered himself and crawled beneath the broken concrete. White fur disappeared into darkness inch by inch until only the small light on his collar remained visible. Then that vanished too. Ethan held the line loosely, feeling every movement through the harness lead. Atlas advanced 10 feet. 15. The passage twisted. The lead brushed stone, then went slack. Atlas. Ethan whispered. From beyond the collapse came one bark. Soft. Controlled. Hannah breathed again. Atlas continued. The narrow route opened into an old cable trench running behind the damaged wall. The scent of rust and seawater thickened around him, but another scent lay beneath it. Isaiah. Familiar. Faint. Alive. Atlas moved through shallow water and over fallen conduit, following the trace that had drawn him night after night. Behind him, Ethan fed out the line until only a few feet remained. Then Atlas stopped. The lead tightened. A wall stood ahead, smooth concrete except for a maintenance gap near the floor. From the other side came labored breathing and the soft voice of a young woman. Atlas pressed his nose to the opening. "Is that him?" Lena Ortiz whispered. Isaiah answered with effort. "That is my partner." Atlas pawed once at the gap and gave a low whine. Isaiah moved closer. Through the narrow space, his fingers touched the dog's muzzle. Atlas pressed forward until his nose and forehead rested against Isaiah's hand. For 9 days, the Marine had measured time by darkness, water, and the brief hour when the pipes carried sound. Now warm fur touched his palm. He smiled, though no one could see it. "You kept the watch," he whispered. Atlas shifted so the pouch on his harness faced the opening. Isaiah found it by touch and pulled out the warming packs and blanket. He wrapped them around Lena first. The communication light cast a dim glow across the chamber, revealing stained walls, a raised equipment platform, and water moving slowly below. Lena's face softened beneath the light. "They found us." Isaiah listened to Atlas breathing on the other side of the wall. "He found us." Back near the collapse, Ethan felt the lead move twice. A signal. Atlas had reached them. Hannah pressed both hands to her mouth, not to hide fear, but relief. Then the radio on Ethan's shoulder came alive. Price's voice broke through the static. "We found the original maintenance entry. It is 20 yards east of your position, buried behind the false wall. We are cutting through now." The tide surged around Ethan's ankles. The tunnel groaned. Dust fell from the ceiling. Atlas barked once from beyond the collapse, and Isaiah answered through the pipe with 2 quiet taps. For the first time, the sound did not feel like a plea. It felt like a promise being carried from one side of the darkness to the other. The cutting began behind the false wall with a low mechanical hum that traveled through the tunnel like distant thunder. Price and the engineers worked from the eastern passage, removing layers of rusted paneling and old insulation, while Captain Hale watched the tide gauge fall toward its final safe mark. Water now covered the floor to mid-calf in the lower corridor. Each minute made the walls sound less like concrete and more like the inside of a ship. Ethan kept one hand on Atlas's lead. The line stretched through the narrow opening, over broken conduit, and into the dark where the dog remained beside Isaiah and Lena. 3 minutes, Price called over the radio. Maybe 4. Captain Hale looked toward the rising water. "You have too." On the other side of the wall, Isaiah sat with his back against the raised platform, one arm around Lena's shoulders to keep the thermal blanket closed around her. Atlas lay pressed against his leg. The small light on the dog's collar gave the chamber a pale blue glow. For 9 days, Isaiah had saved what little water remained for Lena. He had counted each hour by the tide and each night by Atlas's distant bark. Now the dog's breathing gave him something more reliable than time. It gave him certainty. Lena listened to the cutting sound growing louder. "What if they cannot reach us before the water comes back?" Isaiah looked toward the wall. "They reached us. Already. That is not what I asked. It is the answer that matters." Atlas lifted his head as a sharp vibration passed through the concrete. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Isaiah placed a hand over the dog's neck. "Easy." The command was soft, but Atlas did not relax. He stood and faced the eastern wall. His ears rose. Something behind it shifted. Then came a hollow crack, not violent, but final. A thin beam of white light appeared near the floor. Lena covered her mouth. On the other side, Ethan dropped to one knee and saw Atlas's eyes through the opening. "I have him." The engineers widened the gap carefully, removing one section at a time. Cold water poured through first. Then Atlas pushed his nose into the opening and barked once. Ethan reached through and touched the dog's harness. "Good boy. Stay." Atlas did not move. He turned back toward Isaiah. Price looked through the gap and saw the raised platform, Lena beneath the blanket, and Isaiah beside her. "We can get one person through now." Isaiah answered before anyone asked. "Ortiz first." Lena shook her head. "No, you have been here longer. You go first." "Gunnery, Sergeant." Isaiah looked at her with the same calm expression he had worn when the storm began. "That is an order." The opening widened to nearly 2 feet. Hannah crawled through from the rescue side, carrying a medical bag and a flotation vest. She reached Lena, checked her breathing, then secured the vest around her. "We are taking you home," Hannah said. Lena looked at Isaiah. He nodded once. With Ethan guiding from the other side, Hannah helped Lena through the opening. Hands reached for her. The rescue team lifted her onto a stretcher and moved her toward the north outlet. Atlas watched until she disappeared, then returned to Isaiah. Price checked the wall again. "We need another minute." Captain Hale's voice came through the radio. "You do not have another minute. The north passage is filling." Water surged around the engineer's boots, carrying leaves and sand from the tidal gate. Ethan looked through the opening. Isaiah tried to rise, but his legs did not hold him at first. Atlas moved beneath his arm, bracing his body against the Marine's side. Isaiah steadied himself with one hand on the dog's harness. "Still standing," Ethan said quietly. Isaiah gave the faintest smile. Together, they moved toward the gap. Atlas went first, crawling through and turning immediately to face Isaiah. Ethan reached both arms into the chamber. Price and Hannah supported from behind. Isaiah lowered himself carefully and began to pass through the narrow opening. The wall groaned again. Water rushed around his knees. For one breathless moment, his jacket caught on a bent piece of metal. Atlas barked. Ethan pulled the fabric free, and Isaiah came through into the corridor. He did not collapse. He placed one hand against the wall, found his balance, and looked down at Atlas. The white dog rose onto his hind legs and pressed his front paws against Isaiah's chest. Isaiah wrapped both arms around him. No one spoke. The tunnel was full of alarms, rushing water, and shouted instructions, but around them there was only that embrace. Atlas pushed his face beneath Isaiah's chin and held there as if confirming what scent, sound, and faith had already told him. His Marine was alive. Captain Hale's voice returned, sharper now. "Move. Everyone out." The team turned toward the north outlet. Isaiah walked with Ethan on one side and Atlas on the other. Each step was slow, but none went backward. Behind them, the lower chamber filled with seawater, erasing the small platform, the empty bottles, and the place where hope had waited in darkness. Ahead, the passage opened toward rain, wind, and the flashing lights of rescue vehicles. When Isaiah finally emerged beneath the stormy sky, Atlas stepped out beside him and lifted his head into the rain. For the first time in 9 nights, he did not bark. 3 weeks later, the southern edge of Camp Ashford looked almost ordinary again. The floodwater had drained from the service roads. Broken branches had been cleared from the pines. Fresh gravel covered the places where the storm had torn channels through the ground. Only the abandoned watchtower remained unchanged, standing against the Carolina sky with its rusted frame, clouded windows, and silent speaker facing the ocean. Isaiah. Brooks returned to duty slowly. The doctors had ordered rest, warm meals, and limited movement until his strength returned. He followed most of those instructions. Atlas followed all of them for him. The white German shepherd slept beside Isaiah's chair during medical checks, walked at his left side through the rehabilitation hall, and raised his head whenever Isaiah's breathing changed. He no longer paced at night. He no longer waited beside the kennel gate. Wherever Isaiah went, Atlas settled nearby as though distance itself had become something he no longer trusted. Lena Ortiz recovered in the base clinic and returned home to her family in Wilmington. Before leaving, she found Isaiah near the training field and handed him a small metal washer taken from the relay chamber. "I kept hearing you tap this against the pipe," she said. Isaiah turned it between his fingers. The edges had been worn smooth. It was the only thing loud enough. Lena looked down at Atlas. He heard it. He always did. She crouched and placed both hands gently around the dog's face. Atlas allowed it, then leaned forward until his forehead touched hers. Lena closed her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Atlas said nothing. He did not need to. The investigation into Sentinel-9 lasted longer than the rescue. Engineers found that several flood sensors had failed after years of neglected maintenance. The hidden passages were mapped, reinforced, and permanently marked on every emergency plan. Captain Hale refused to let the old watchtower be demolished. Instead, she ordered the structure stabilized and the ground beneath it sealed except for one preserved section of conduit. "Some places should not disappear just because they stopped being useful," she told Daniel Price. Some places become useful in a different way. Price restored the dead radio speaker and mounted it behind glass inside the tower. It still had no power. It never would. Beside it, he placed a small plaque with no names and no decoration. It carried only 5 words. For those who kept listening, Isaiah saw it for the first time on a clear October evening. The air had turned cool, and the ocean beyond the dunes reflected the last orange light of sunset. He walked slowly along the southern road with Atlas beside him. Ethan Cole followed several steps behind, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You know," Ethan said, "the night crew still claims they hear knocking down there." Isaiah glanced toward him. "Do they?" "Only when they are trying to avoid paperwork." Isaiah smiled. It was the first easy smile Ethan had seen from him since the storm. They reached the tower just before midnight. Captain Hale, Hannah Mercer, and Daniel Price were already waiting near the concrete base, though no ceremony had been planned. No uniforms had been pressed for the occasion. No one gave a speech. They simply stood together beneath the steel frame while wind moved softly through the grass. Atlas walked to the exact place where he had waited for 9 nights. He lowered his nose to the concrete and breathed in the old scents. Rain, rust, salt. Isaiah. Then he sat. The clock on Ethan's watch reached 12:03. Everyone looked toward the silent speaker. Nothing happened. No static. No voice. No knocking from beneath the ground. Only the distant sound of waves folding onto the shore. Isaiah stepped beside Atlas and rested one hand on the dog's neck. For a moment, neither moved. Then Isaiah reached beneath his jacket and drew out his dog tags. The metal caught the moonlight. He tapped them 3 times against his wedding ring finger. A pause. Then twice. Atlas's ears rose. He looked up at Isaiah, eyes bright and calm, and answered with one soft bark. The sound traveled through the tower and out across the empty field. It was not an alarm. It was not grief. It was not a question sent into the dark. It was acknowledgement. A name spoken without words. A promise returned. Isaiah lowered himself carefully onto the concrete beside the dog. Atlas leaned against his shoulder, warm and solid. The others stepped away and gave them the silence. Far offshore, a navigation light blinked red, vanished, then returned. Isaiah watched it with Atlas until the first pale line of morning appeared beyond the water. Some voices travel through wires, some through walls. Some survive because one faithful soul refuses to believe silence is the end. And sometimes, the answer does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it sits beside you in the dark, breathing softly, keeping watch until you are ready to come home.